Hey there, I am in Roscoe, Illinois at Historic Auto Attractions. Now this museum has actually been towards the top of my list of places that I want to go to that's realistic for quite a while, and it's taken quite a while to get up here. It's only open during the summer, but this place is not as boring as it might sound. I mean, that's a good name, but that does not convey everything they have here. So stay tuned. We're gonna go really in depth. It's gonna be 1 or 2 or 3 parts. I'm not sure yet, but this is gonna be good. So let's go check this place out. All right, so we're gonna head in and see what all Historic Auto Attractions is about. We are being welcomed by a creepy old butler guy to one of the greatest museums ever to exist. This place is located inside an industrial park north of Rockford. There's not a lot around here, and there's not a lot of visitors who come here. The museum is located here because it's close to the workplace of its owner, Wayne Lensing. He owns Left-Hander Chassis, which builds and manufactures chassis for short track racing, and distributes race car parts. The business has been successful and has allowed him to amass one of the best private collections in the country. This is a 1906 Orient buckboard. It was advertised as the cheapest automobile in the world at $375, and it could go up to 30 miles an hour. The best part about this museum is that buckboard we just saw was just about the least rare and unusual thing at this museum. Almost everything is very historically important, tied to some famous person, event, or thing. I did end up spending 6 hours going through. Here are some taxidermy lions right by the entrance to the main exhibits. First off, the turn of the century, which is more of an exhibit on the American West. This is a vintage blow-apart display of the Model 39 Winchester rifle. That's a war tunic, tomahawk, and bow from the mid-1800s. This is a Springfield Model 1866 rifle with some modifications made by Native Americans, but this rifle was used at the Wounded Knee Massacre. This is a Winchester Model 1866 lever-action musket used at the Battle of Little Bighorn, supposedly by Chief Spotted Elk. He was chief of the Minneconjou Sioux, and he ended up getting killed at Wounded Knee. There's an 1873 Springfield, decorated by a Native American, and a decorated shotgun from the Wind River Reservation. A very old bison skull found in Iowa, that may be 5,000 years old, and there's a younger bison skull that was also found near the Big Sioux River. A collection of other Native American artifacts, like arrowheads. This is the hatchet of He-Dog, a Lakota warrior. He put the 5 notches in the axe handle, one for each battle he fought in, which included the Fetterman Battle and Rosebud. He also fought at Little Bighorn. That's a Sioux scalping knife. Wonder how many scalps this one cut. That is the signature of Sitting Bull. This was actually a souvenir card from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, dated 1884. He did perform with the show after the Indian Wars of the 1870s. There's a headdress, crossbow, and a newspaper describing the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's romanticized last stand, where his entire cavalry regiment got killed, and that is General George Custer's autograph. This is an 1869 cavalry tunic from the 32nd Infantry. It was worn by William Yates, who was stationed at Camp Goodwin in Arizona Territory during the Apache Wars. These are wax figures of General Custer, Clint Eastwood, and John Wayne. This museum has as many wax figures as an actual wax museum. That's James Arness's costume worn as Marshall Dillon in Gunsmoke, and that piano next to it was used in Gunsmoke, the longest running drama or western series in TV history. That's Mary Blanchard's green saloon dress worn in the 1954 western Destry, and Dorothy Malone's dress from Law and Order, where she starred alongside Ronald Reagan. That is a prop passenger train coach car and caboose used by MGM when filming train scenes in the 1930s and 40s, and they made this thing look like a real moving train. Movie magic. That is John Wayne's cowboy hat, used in some Warner Brother productions. That's Pierce Lydon's cowboy hat. He was a Western actor who appeared in over 300 films and 100 TV shows. That is World War II hero Audie Murphy's Nudie's ostrich boots and his scarf. Murphy was an actor after the war and was in quite a few westerns like Destry and Gunsmoke. John Wayne's personal shoehorn engraved with the word Duke, and his personalized engraved decorative cigarette case. That is Tom Mix's cowboy hat. He was the king of the cowboys in the 1930s, and he appeared in over 100 cowboy movies, then died in a horrific car crash. That is Gary Cooper's original grave marker from Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. He passed away in 1961, and this was his grave for 13 years. Then he was exhumed and moved to Southampton, New York. Those are the cowboy boots of Duncan Ronaldo. There's a badge and key from the Joliet, Illinois prison, a Wells Fargo belt buckle, and an Alcatraz guard badge. This is a 3-page letter from Josephine Earp, Wyatt Earp's wife, to Mrs. Breeson, a relative of the guy who owned the famous Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City. This is a model 1878 Colt .45 revolver and holster of Rose Dunn, also known as the Rose of Cimarron. This is Bill Tillman's revolver. He was an important Wild West lawman in the Oklahoma Territory. This is a Kit Carson inscribed rifle receiver that was found on the border of Texas and New Mexico. Those are original Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid reward posters. They both say wanted, dead or alive. This is Frank James's revolver. He was the older brother of Jesse James. He was a Confederate guerrilla like Jesse and did some robberies, but he stopped after his brother was killed. These are Jesse James's spurs. He was one of the most famous bank and train robbers in American history. And this was Jesse James's revolver. It is believed that he killed 8 men using this Colt, and while James was being pursued by officers swimming his horse across the Missouri River, he accidentally dropped this gun in the water. When the river realigned 20 years later, this was found, and it still has a bullet loaded by Jesse James inside of it. This is the signature of Buffalo Bill Cody, originally a Pony Express rider and Army Scout, but he became most famous for the legendary Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and he toured the country for over 30 years. This relic is pretty awesome. It's a beaded deerskin jacket that was worn by Buffalo Bill. It is dated 1894. This is a traveling trunk used during the Wild West show. This one is dated to 1885. And this is a Winchester Model 1866 rifle that belonged to Buffalo Bill. He might have used this during the show or to hunt buffalo. This old blunderbuss is believed to have been owned by a pilgrim in New England, and it was made in the 1700s. This one is very awesome. John Coulter's flintlock rifle. He was a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, but stayed out west to explore Yellowstone, Jackson Hole, and other regions of the West. In case you haven't seen enough Wild West guns, here's plenty more in this cabinet. This was Annie Oakley's shotgun. Little Miss Sure-Shot had this gun ordered and converted into a rifle by her husband Frank Butler, and the museum claims that this was her favorite gun. Texas Sheriff John H. Slaughter's shotgun, an Arizona Ranger shotgun, and a Virginia and Truckee Railroad double-barrel shotgun, used to keep order among those seeking the Comstock lode. These are wagon wheel hubs from the Donner Party expedition. These were witness to the cannibalism among its members during the horrid winter trapped up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. This is an 1860 horse-drawn hearse that was used in Billings, Montana, which was not all too far from the Battle of Little Bighorn. This is a genuine Wells Fargo Overland Stage U.S. mail stagecoach. Where the railroads ended, Wells Fargo had to use stagecoaches, and they eventually owned the largest stagecoach empire in the world. This coach was part of the Butterfield Line, the regular twice-a-week mail service between St. Louis and San Francisco, starting in 1857. And here are wax figures of the two main characters from Bonanza, the second longest running Western in history. There's Michael Landon and Dan Blocker. They also have Bonanza's Ben Cartwright on an old wagon, and a 1924 Fordson tractor in the background. They even throw in an old school taxidermy display with all sorts of wildlife, not necessarily native to Illinois, but most of these are somewhere on the continent. This guy is pretty rare, a harbor spotted seal, and that was just the first exhibit. Now we're moving on to the 1920s and 1930s in Gangsterland. This is a Bonnie and Clyde death car. The infamous duo were ambushed in this stolen car in Louisiana in 1934, and they were shot at no less than 167 times. It was quite the grisly death. The real car is at Whiskey Pete's Casino in Primm, Nevada. This is a replica car made for the 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. The bullet holes are real. The car was shot at with a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun. Next to the car are the actual hats worn by Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker in the car on May 23, 1934, when they were killed. This small sequin tam style hat that Bonnie was wearing does have a bullet hole right to the head. And there's a bullet hole on the back brim of Clyde's fedora. That's a Smith & Wesson revolver and some bullets that were taken from the death car. That's a swatch of cloth from the wool pants that Clyde was wearing when he was killed. This .22 Colt rifle was used by Ray Hamilton, a member of Bonnie and Clyde's gang in 1934. He's believed to have used this during an armed robbery in Texas, and Bonnie attempted to burn this rifle by setting it on fire in an outhouse after a shootout with police. Historic Auto Attractions probably has the best Dillinger collection on display now, after Indiana's Dillinger Museum closed again. Dillinger used this 1932 Studebaker Commander as a getaway car after he robbed the Central National Bank in Greencastle, Indiana, in October of 1933. When police swarmed the bank, they didn't think to block off his getaway car. It was actually a stolen unmarked sheriff's vehicle. The Greencastle robbery ended up being the largest bank robbery in history. By that point, Dillinger stole over $75,000. This was John Dillinger's bulletproof vest, which he left at the Little Bohemia Lodge when he evaded an FBI raid there, and he also left this Colt .45 revolver at the Little Bohemia. This badge was worn by the arresting constable during the raid at Little Bohemia. There's a gun flash compressor used by Dillinger's gang, and Dillinger's Colt .45 caliber. Here are a whole bunch of big guns that were owned by Dillinger. Some of these guns he used belonged to his father and grandfather. On July 22, 1934, John Dillinger left the Biograph Theater in Chicago and was surprised by a police attack there, and this is the gun used by East Chicago officer Martin Zarkovich to fire the fatal shot that killed John Dillinger. Some badges of Chief Wallard. He was successful at arresting Dillinger in Tucson, Arizona. And that is a John Dillinger death mask. One thing I've noticed in my travels to museums is that there are a lot of John Dillinger death masks. But Historic Auto Attractions claims this to be the actual death mask cast on Dillinger's dead face by the coroner. Dillinger went on a movie date to the Biograph with the lady in red to see Manhattan Melodrama. And this was Clark Gable's suit that he wore in that movie, the last movie Dillinger saw just before his death. This is a 1929 Ford Model AA, used in Al Capone's bootlegging operations during Prohibition. This rum runner may have been used to get liquor from either his East Coast connections or from the Purple Gang in Detroit, and this operation made Capone very rich and powerful in Chicago. Capone lived and worked out of the Lexington Hotel in downtown Chicago, and these were the vault doors to his office there. He had all sorts of secret passages and stairways that led to hidden tunnels under the city to connect taverns, warehouses, bosses and to provide escapes from police raids and attacks by rivals. We're moving on to the insane collection of the famous Cars and Stars exhibit. These are all costumes from Gone with the Wind, including Carole Lombard's yellow dress, Clark Gable's coat jacket and vest, and Vivien Leigh's petticoat. A ticket and brick from the Loew's Grand Theater premiere of the movie in 1940. Some servingware props. Vivien Leigh's brooch and matching earrings. And her screen-used scarf. Some screen-used pillars. And an oil-on-wood portrait of Rhett Butler displayed for the opening of the movie. This mirror is in the movie. That is Clark Gable's signed contract for The Misfits in 1960. That would end up being his last movie as he passed away 2 weeks after filming completed. This is Carole Lombard's wristwatch. She was a native Hoosier and died tragically in a plane crash. That is Clark Gable's marriage certificate to his first wife, Josephine Dillon. He liked Carole Lombard a lot more. That is a Lucky Strike cigarette release form signed by Gable, and his signed death claim insurance form for Carole Lombard's death, and that describes the incident of Lombard's death in great detail. Here are some more Gone with the Wind promotions from back in the day. In this giant guitar, there's a wax figure and the actual clothes of Johnny Cash, as well as June Carter's gown, along with a guitar used by Johnny Cash. That's a wig Patsy Cline wore after her terrible car crash, as well as her blouse and some other accessories. The yellow dress was Patsy Cline's. It's next to a dress worn by Loretta Lynn and two that belong to Tammy Wynette. That is Conway Twitty's 1957 Lincoln Continental Mark II. It has its original chrome paint on it, and it's one of the nicest Mark IIs ever made. This case has the costumes of Porter Wagner, Johnny Taylor, and Eddie Arnold. This is a wax figure of String Bean, best known as his role as the banjo player in Hee Haw, but he was also a country singer besides Hee Haw, and this is one of his actual costumes. This case has the jackets of Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, Tex Williams, Fats Domino, and Hank Thompson. This is a Nipper statue, and this statue was displayed at the RCA studio in Nashville. Then one day Waylon Jennings basically stole it out of the lobby when no one was looking and took it home with him. On the left is Jim Reeves' stage outfit, and Hank Snow's stage-worn outfit on the right. This is a shirt of one of the most legendary country musicians, Hank Williams Sr. That's Hank Williams' cowboy hat, worn during his last days with the Louisiana Hayride, a country radio and TV show that promoted him and many other artists. There's another one of his hats and his glasses. There's another one of his shirts, and that picture in the background shows him performing with this shirt on. There are Thomas Edison's reading glasses, which are thrown in with all these music legends. And next to Edison's glasses are the spectacles worn by Nicolas Cage in National Treasure. This place is the best. They have a collection of props from some Egyptian-themed movies. There's clothing and a chair from Cleopatra, along with some other screen-used props. This is pretty awesome. That is one of the chariots used in the Amazing Chariot sequence in the 1959 Ben-Hur. This is the Bicentennial Money Car, a 1976 Cadillac limousine covered with 120,000 coins. It was the largest bicentennial project by any individual group in the country, and it took 2 years to complete. The car itself weighed 2.5 tons, but the coins add another ton to it. Most of the coins on here were coined in 1976, and the roof is covered by Indian head nickels and Kennedy half dollars. There's some unique coins on the back, like some ancient Roman coins and some other rare coins. This is Harry Houdini's straitjackets. Harry Houdini was one of the greatest performers and magicians in history. He probably wore this straitjacket underwater, and he would have some way to escape somehow. This is one of his traveling show trunks, used for storing props and other necessities. This is a double lock leg iron he used. They have deep carved rivets where the cuffs interlocked for secure fastening, yet Houdini could escape no problem. This is Houdini's key making die. He used this to make keys to fit padlocks. Here are his Judd leg irons used to cuff his hands. That's another pair of handcuffs he used, and his autograph. This is a double lock bar cuff. These totally restrained his movements. This is the 1960 Cadillac limousine of Howard Hughes, the guy who built the Spruce Goose and did quite a few other things with all of his money. This was the first unique automobile that Wayne Lensing bought, so this was the first of the crazy collection here at Historic Auto Attractions. This is Colonel Harlan Sanders' 1939 Lincoln K Limousine V12. It was chauffeur driven, and Colonel Sanders only really used this car for special events. By the way, I've made videos at about every historic location related to Colonel Sanders if you want to look those videos up. This is Elvis Presley's personal 1972 Lincoln Mark IV. Elvis had a lot of cars, many gifted to him, but he personally bought this one in 1972, and he would use this car to drive from Memphis to LA and other cities during the tour. The tour bus followed behind. They have one of Elvis's actual stage costumes. That is cool. It has a scarf autographed by the King on it. Starting on the left is one of the King's shirts, a yellow sundress gifted to Linda Thompson by Elvis. She wore this one in Hee Haw. Elvis also gave her the black dress in the middle, and she wore that evening gown at the Aloha from Hawaii 1973 TV special. There's another Elvis wax figure with one of his black jacket costumes and one of his personally owned shirts on the right. There's a very tiny clipping of the King's hair. This is an original copy of Elvis's last will and testament from 1977. This is a studio mic that was used by Elvis. This thing helped record the amazing voice of Elvis Presley for several MGM movie tracks in the 60s. Those are his father, Vernon Presley's brass peacocks. Elvis also really liked peacocks, and that is a picture that hung in the trophy room at Graceland until his death. Those are some of his TCB necklaces. Of course, his motto means taking care of business. These are his TCB glasses that he smashed in a fit of rage on a wall while performing in Reno, Nevada. This is a rare Elvis 1956 leather belt with quite an interesting buckle. This is one of Elvis's smoked cigars. He only smoked half of this one in 1977. There are a few more items related to Elvis in this case. That is an autographed handkerchief. So if you like Elvis, this museum is definitely one of the places that you need to go to. Here are two wax figures of James Dean, the young Hoosier actor who only starred in 3 movies but still attained legendary status. On the left is his costume from A Rebel Without a Cause, and on the right is his costume from Giants. This is really rare. It is actually the only known piece in existence of James Dean's Porsche 550 Spider when he was killed in a crash with the car. The wrecked car mysteriously disappeared during a move, but a road construction worker named Harry Camby shipped off a piece of the car the evening after the terrible crash when it was in the shop. There's his life mask, which was made not too long before his death in 1955 at the age of 24. And this is one of his personal shirts. He wore this during his last photo shoot days before the car accident, and there's some pictures of him wearing this shirt just before his death. Here's an impressive Buddy Holly collection, which includes one of his sweaters and 2 of his personal shirts. Those are his sunglasses, not as iconic as his regular glasses, but still cool nonetheless. And this is Holly's motorcycle license plate receipt. Unfortunately, he died with the music before this one expired in 1960. This is one of the best Marilyn Monroe collections out there. Of course, Marilyn is probably the most popular sex symbol ever, and she was an actress and singer. This was a dress designed for her in Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, although I don't think this is the one she actually wore. And there's also a little piece of her hair. Those are Marilyn's pearl-covered cat's eye designed sunglasses, Marilyn's faux diamond cigarette case with a matching lighter. This is one of her nightgowns. That's a seat from her LA home. And that up there is her love seat, along with a silk tapestry that was also at her Los Angeles home. This turquoise bustier was worn by Jane Russell in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in 1956, where she starred alongside Marilyn Monroe. To wrap up this exhibit is a 1925 Ford Model T Roadster used by the early comedy troupe Laurel and Hardy in the movie Big Business. Now entering the big exhibit on world leaders. This means the presidents of the United States and other nations' leaders of the 20th century. That is a bicentennial flag that flew over the United States Capitol in 1976. Here are wax figures of great artists and authors like Ernest Hemingway, Hans Christian Andersen, the Brothers Grimm, Rembrandt, Vincent van Gogh, and Pablo Picasso. This is a 1948 Daimler DE36 limousine that was used by the royal family of Great Britain, and this one was used during visits to South Africa. There's a wax figure of Princess Diana, unfortunately in the back seat of the car, and although I don't think she ever would have rode in this car, this museum does have a lot of tragic death references. This 1928 Delage limousine was custom built for King Prachetapak, Lord Rama VII, the King of Siam. This 1950 Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith limousine was used by the Argentinian president Juan Perón and his more famous wife Evita Perón. She was very powerful within the pro-Peronist trade unions and was considered the spiritual leader of Argentina at her death. This is Joseph Stalin's 1937 Packard Super 12. This is a very unique automobile because it is so heavily armored. About 9,000 pounds were added to this vehicle due to its armored body. And it has custom 3-inch thick bulletproof glass, which you can see with the windows rolled halfway down. Stalin really did not want to get assassinated. This is Ulysses S. Grant's 1865 Studebaker Landau carriage. He ordered this carriage in 1865 and used it until he became president. Then he got another one in 1870. Grant did get a speeding ticket while president in DC, and then the second time he got pulled over by the same officer, he actually got arrested and had to go to the police station. Here's a wax figure of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, along with Eleanor Roosevelt. They are both two very interesting individuals. You can see FDR in his wheelchair, which he otherwise would have kept extremely hidden or wouldn't use it, and I have to say he's not looking too well here. Next to the wax figures is a 1938 Cadillac limousine used by the Secret Service to transport President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It stretches 21 feet long and is equipped with a siren, flagstaffs, pistol holders, a built-in gun rack, and wide-running boards to carry agents outside the car. This car was used during the war, so they had very tight security. Truman and Eisenhower also used this car at certain points. This is one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's canes, which he had to use because of his polio. It is carved from the horns of 20 head of Guernsey cattle. That is the pen used to sign the Homeowners Loan Act in 1933. An original folk art inlaid wood portrait of FDR made in 1933, which was gifted to the president. An RCA Victor travel radio with FDR engraved on the front. There's Roosevelt's Harvard class album, a repeal the 18th Amendment license plate, and Eleanor's monogrammed white linen handkerchief. That's a little piece of FDR's funeral caisson from 1945. This is a matchbook from Roosevelt's White House desk, one of his cigars, and stuff advertising the National Recovery Act's programs. That's a tablecloth monogram Mr. and Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt, and a gift from Eleanor Roosevelt to her bodyguard. FDR's original Panama hat. He wore this in 1943 at the Tehran Conference, a meeting between him, Churchill, and Stalin after the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran. Roosevelt's cloth napkins and bed sheets. There's an oil painting of the presidential yacht that hung on the USS Williamsburg. Some more items from the USS Williamsburg, Truman's Air Force One playing cards, and an original book on Truman's 1949 inauguration. That is a 48-star flag that was used on Eisenhower's presidential limousine for parades. These gloves were placed on President Eisenhower's casket at his funeral in 1969 by Mammy. That's some glassware commemorating Eisenhower's trip to Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay in February of 1960. Eisenhower's playing cards from his plane, his hat, his brown wingtip shoes, and his favorite hat used during the presidency. This is one of Ronald Reagan's presidential limousines. It's a 1984 Cadillac originally built as a prototype and without any armor. This is not the limousine that Reagan was pushed into during the 1981 assassination attempt. That one is at the Henry Ford Museum. This is Richard Nixon's 1969 Lincoln Lehman Peterson limo. This vehicle was more commonly used by congressmen and visiting dignitaries to visit Nixon, and this vehicle was later used in the 1995 film Nixon. There's a wax figure of Tricky Dick in the back. This is Harry S. Truman's 1950 Lincoln presidential limousine. It was also used by Eisenhower. You can see the comfy interior, where Harry Truman used to sit. This is a 1962 Cadillac Fleetwood limousine used by Dwight D. Eisenhower. This was actually bought by Mexican Colonel Darlo, a close friend to President Miguel Alemán, and at that point they had become like the richest men in Mexico. They sold this car specifically for the use of the ex-President Eisenhower when he visited Mexico in 1962. This is Lyndon B. Johnson's 1965 Lincoln Lehman Peterson limousine. It was custom built for the protection of the president after the assassination of the last one in a presidential limousine. This one was customized by LBJ. He wanted a blue plaid interior with a writing console, a TV, and other unique features. This is Calvin Coolidge's 1923 Lincoln, which was used while he was in office, so this is one of the earliest presidential automobiles on display in the country. Historic Auto Attractions has its own Hall of Wax Presidents, and although they don't have all of them, it's still a good collection of wax figures. Here we have George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant, Herbert Hoover, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Grant was a chain smoker, and that did eventually kill him, and he's also looking very ragged. Here is Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon. Nixon looks pissed off. We continue the timeline to Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush. And some of the more recent presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. They do have a Donald Trump wax figure, but he is elsewhere in the museum. Now we're going to take an interesting turn. There's a chair from Hitler's yacht, a BMW R75 motorcycle with a sidecar, a wax figure of Adolf Hitler, and his 1939 Mercedes G4 six-wheeled staff car. This is an extremely rare vehicle, and this was usually used in parades and as a staff car for Hitler and other high-ranking Nazi officials. This vehicle was designed and intended to display, quote, the government, the party, and the armed forces. So that's terrifying. Next to that is Benito Mussolini's 1939 Lancia Astura parade car. It was originally bought by the Italian ministry, but Mussolini frequently used this car. This is the last flag removed from Mussolini's headquarters in Rome, taken down in May 1944 as Rome fell to the Allies. This is Heinrich Himmler's 1939 Porsche 930V Cabriolet staff car. Himmler was the chief of police and the minister of the interior, and also one of the people most directly responsible for the Holocaust. Here are some Nazi armbands and medals. And these are 2 of the original 8 German and Japanese surrender documents. There's a wax figure of Emperor Hirohito, who was the traditional leader of Japan during the war, and this was his 1935 Packard Model 1202 limousine. This is a Japanese bolt-action .38 carbine rifle with some really interesting decorations on the stock. This is Nikita Khrushchev's 1950 Zim limousine. He used this car as the premier of the Soviet Union. This case has a lot of unique Nazi artifacts. I do want to say this museum very clearly states here that these displays are for historical purposes only. Historic auto attractions nor Hoosier Boo promotes Nazism. Anyways, that is a grill emblem from Himmler's car over there. Himmler made this book titled Das Ahnenerbe, a custom presentation of the philosophy of the SS, and gave it to Hitler for his 50th birthday. This is a little jewelry chest from Himmler's house. That is Himmler's pistol with the initials HH and SS engraved on the sides. Yeah, that belonged to the leader of the Gestapo and the Holocaust movement. Those are the remains of Himmler's eyeglasses. He wore these when he committed suicide by cyanide on May 23, 1945. This is Rudolf Hess's presentation cigar case, given to him by the city of Salzburg after the annexation of Austria, and that is Hess's gold visor cap. Those are original documents from the Nuremberg trials. Enclosed are the closing arguments on December 9th of 1946 regarding the military tribunal against Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician. That's Hermann Goering's cyanide capsule container. He did take a little cyanide capsule out of this container to kill himself in 1945. That's Goering's engraved gold-washed pistol. This swastika armband was actually owned and worn by Hitler himself. This is the key to Hitler's office at the Eagle's Nest. The white tablecloth down there was personalized for Adolf Hitler. There's also a bronze plaque of him, and Hitler's cutlery on the green to the right. This is Eva Braun's pistol, engraved with her name, and this was Eva Braun's monogram parasol. So they have a very unique collection of major artifacts related to the Nazi Party leaders. Again, not at all a fan, but this stuff is interesting. Here are world leaders in wax, including Ayatollah Khomeini, Yasser Arafat, Anwar Sadat, Indira Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Chairman Mao, King Hussein, and Mikhail Gorbachev. There's a wax figure of Fidel Castro, and that flag is signed by Castro, and it looks to be from way back in the 50s or 60s. And there's a wax figure of Senator Robert Kennedy in the mix. The next exhibit is the largest collection of Kennedy artifacts on public display in the world, even more I would say than the Kennedy Library in Boston. This video is based on the incredible collection of items related to President John F. Kennedy. For example, this 1962 Lincoln Continental convertible was used by the president to visit troops at Fort Stewart, Georgia in November of 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The 2 suits were JFK's. He wore the one on the right while he was senator, and the one in the middle he wore as president of the United States. There's also a very unique Kennedy campaign dress on the left. That is one of Jackie Kennedy's jackets. Jackie's maternity dress that she probably wore while pregnant with Caroline or JFK Jr. That was worn by a very young Caroline Kennedy. Next to that is her yellow Easter outfit. and JFK Jr.'s riding uniform. Jackie's necklace that was worn in that Life magazine cover. There is a whole display on the clothing of Camelot. Here they have 19 of Jackie's dresses designed for her by Ole Cassini. Jackie was very notable for her sense of fashion, which she was very educated about when she studied at the Sorbonne in Paris. The famous designer Ole Cassini designed over 300 outfits for her. He was hand-selected by Jackie as her personal and exclusive designer in 1960, and these all belong to Jackie. I'm pretty sure this is the only place where you can see 19 of her dresses. This was her evening gown, worn while First Lady. While John is the most well known, his brothers Robert and Edward were also very important historical figures, but they don't really have any artifacts of theirs in this museum. Their eldest brother, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., was a Navy bomber pilot during World War II, but he was killed during a mission. And this was his 1938 Harvard yearbook. That was Kathleen Kennedy's wristwatch. She was the sister who died in 1948 in a plane crash. There are some articles about George, the magazine that JFK Jr. owned and produced, before he also died in a plane crash. That's some of the president's hair. That is his golf ball and 2 of his tees. He was an avid golfer, and they are personalized for him. Mr. President is labeled on that golf ball. One of John F. Kennedy's Lord Elgin watches. Kennedy wore these shoes while he was senator from 1953 to 1960. One of Jackie's hats, and a whole bunch of her shoes designed by Cassini. They also have her formal gloves and her comb. That is a Coffee with Kennedy cup that JFK used during one of his many breakfast events during the 1960 campaign. This is a Kennedy for President styrofoam campaign hat that JFK briefly wore during a campaign stop in Baltimore. A hat designed by the famed designer Harry Roenick for John F. Kennedy, along with his weird wax head. That is a section of wood from the inaugural platform, on which John F. Kennedy delivered his famed inaugural address on January 20th, 1961. That big flag bunting was on the inaugural platform. This was built on the east front of the US Capitol building. They now do it on the west side facing the mall. That is the Lord Elgin watch that Kennedy wore at the inaugural ball. And that is the tuxedo jacket and the shoes he wore at the inaugural ball. This is the flag that flew over the US Capitol during his funeral on November 25th, 1963. Those are dictaphone belts, manual folders, and an earpiece that was used by Kennedy and his secretary Evelyn Lincoln for administrative and documenting purposes in the Oval Office. There's another little clipping of his hair. And this is a very unique relic, a preserved piece of JFK's 45th birthday cake from the Madison Square Garden event in 1962, where Marilyn Monroe very famously sang "Happy Birthday" to Mr. President. And the cake is still intact, ready to be eaten. Kind of. Apparently the owner, Wayne Lensing, has taken a tiny bite of the cake. I mean, if I owned it, I guess you have to, you know? On November 22nd, 1963, the President and First Lady were riding in an open-top presidential limousine in a motorcade through downtown Dallas, Texas, when the President was tragically gunned down. There are wax figures of JFK and Jackie as they appeared on that day. In a 1963 Lincoln convertible, this is not a replica of the presidential limousine. The real one, although significantly altered after the assassination, is at the Henry Ford Museum. But following behind the president's limousine is the real Secret Service car that was following directly behind the president's limo when the assassination took place.
This is the Secret Service car 679-X. It is in the picture here taken by James William Ike Algins. It was maybe 2 seconds after the president had suffered the first shot, and so the vehicle that you see in the photograph is this vehicle.
It's a 1956 Cadillac Secret Service limousine where Secret Service members were keeping an eye on things, and some agents would stand on these side running boards there. One such Secret Service agent was Clint Hill, who was standing on this sideboard on this side when the shots rang out. He leapt from the board onto the president's vehicle and tried to get the First Lady back from picking up JFK's splattered brains on the trunk and got her back in the rear seat, and he shielded them with his body until they got to Parkland Hospital. Unlike Kennedy's assassination car today, this car looks exactly as it did on that fateful day in Dallas, Texas. The assassination of John F. Kennedy is still one of the most shocking and tragic events in American history, and this setup here at Historic Auto Attractions very well depicts the motorcade through Dealey Plaza when the shots rung out. This is an original negative taken by the FBI after the vehicle returned to DC, still splattered in blood. And this is some of the real upholstery from the assassination vehicle that is John F. Kennedy's blood stained on it. These are some items related to the Hotel Texas, where JFK spent his last night on November 21st. That is an exhibition pamphlet left in Kennedy's room that night. An art exhibit was organized for the President and First Lady at their hotel rooms. I would like to read that and see what was there. I do know that there was a Van Gogh. Kennedy took this notepad from his Hotel Texas room and put them in his Air Force One desk while on the short flight from Fort Worth to Dallas. These are the contents of the briefcase that the President brought with him on the Texas trip. This brown leather eyeglass case was removed from the President's desk on Air Force One by an attendant at the direction of the new President Lyndon Johnson. He requested that en route to Love Field before boarding Air Force One and taking the oath of office. An original press kit and script for Oliver Stone's JFK, and an Air Force One press pass from November 22nd. This is incredible. The eyeglasses worn by Evelyn Lincoln on Air Force One when Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States. In the famous photo, Evelyn Lincoln is the person standing between Johnson and Jackie. These papers were removed from Kennedy's Oval Office desk on November 23, 1963. Kennedy left them there during the Texas trip, but never returned to them. This is a piece of the platform that Kennedy spoke on at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas on November 21st, one of his last speeches. This is Dr. Berkeley's medical bag. He was Kennedy's personal physician, and he carried this bag around with him in Dallas. This was Evelyn Lincoln's purse that she carried in the Dallas motorcade. This is the scissor jack from the President's limousine, and this was on board when he was shot. I'm not really going to get into the conspiracy theories regarding the assassination, but they have a piece of the original grassy knoll fence that was there on that day in 1963, where many believe an assassin was stationed. The whole fence was at the now closed Conspiracy Museum in Dallas, and the owner of that museum gave this piece to Lensing. There is a lot of graffiti on the back. The most interesting inscription states, "It was Johnson." These are artifacts of Carl A. Peden, and he was co-pilot on the way back to Washington with the body of the slain president, along with a new president. This is the printing plate of the Dallas Morning News November 23rd edition that announced Kennedy's death in that city. The alleged assassin is Lee Harvey Oswald, who worked and shot from the Texas School Book Depository. He immediately but casually left the building and got in this 1962 Checker Marathon Dallas taxi cab, which makes this Oswald's getaway car. He had driver William Wayne Whaley drive him back 2 blocks from his rooming house. Whaley tried to make conversation with him. He apparently asked, "What the hell do you think happened?" and Oswald didn't answer back. The fare was 95 cents, and Oswald gave him $1 and said, "Keep the change."
Captain Fritz. There is a person. There is Lee. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
2 days later, while in custody, Lee Harvey Oswald was fatally shot as police were about to move him from the city jail to the county jail. This is the ambulance that the fatally wounded Oswald was put into and rushed to Parkland Hospital, the same place where Kennedy was taken 2 days earlier, and he died in a room feet away from the room that Kennedy died in. This vehicle was formerly displayed at the Tragedy in U.S. History Museum in St. Augustine, which was a very great and old school museum that unfortunately closed way back in 1998, and this is the original display sign. That is Oswald's gray sweater, a similar rifle to the one Oswald used, and this is the actual catalog that Oswald owned and used to order the gun that he used to kill Kennedy. It was addressed to A. Hiddle, one of his aliases. This is the suit that Lee Harvey Oswald wore at his wedding to Marina Oswald. He purchased this when he was in the Soviet Union and brought it back with him when he defected. In 2011, Wayne Lensing got a hold of Lee Harvey Oswald's original grave marker from Fort Worth. It was removed in 1967, and apparently Oswald's mother kept this in her home due to fears of it being stolen again. A family purchased that house and the grave came with it, but a distant relative sold it to historic auto attractions, and it was displayed right here in this room. In 2016, the old owner of that house sued to get the gravestone back, claiming that the selling was not authorized, and he did legally win it back. It's now at the 6th floor museum in Dallas, which unfortunately doesn't allow photography, so I do wish it were still here in this collection. This paper was signed by former President Gerald Ford, reconfirming the Warren Commission findings in 2003. He was a member of the Warren Commission. That's a brick from the Texas School Book Depository. This is a chair from the Texas Theater. Oswald snuck into a showing here about an hour after the assassination, but he was found and caught there. That's Jack Ruby's suit jacket. This is the uniform of Officer Nick McDonald, the arresting officer of Lee Harvey Oswald. These are the actual shoes Jack Ruby was wearing when he shot Oswald. They also have his hat. This is a guide to Dallas entertainment. Ruby did own clubs in the Dallas area, and this was in Ruby's pocket when he shot Oswald and he himself was arrested. That gun was commonly carried by Ruby in his boot as a hidden backup gun, and the gun to the right of that belonged to Dallas PD Captain Will Fritz, who was in charge of the Kennedy assassination and Oswald murder investigations. That is the original license plate from the ambulance over there that transported Oswald to Parkland, and this is Jack Ruby's necktie. It has a mezuzah symbol on it. This is Detective Jim Lavell's autograph. I found out the day I visited here that he had passed away the day before, on August 29th, 2019. This is the scene of Oswald's murder with wax figures of Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. That is a bullet fired from the gun that Jack Ruby used to kill Oswald. 100 rounds were shot from it at one point for souvenirs. That is Jack Ruby's polygraph test. The House Select Committee concluded that he apparently lied twice when he stated that he had never met Oswald before and that he had not assisted Oswald in the assassination. This is the window from the Texas School Book Depository that was directly to the right of the window which Oswald shot out of. Oswald's window is still kept by the FBI, but this one was right next to it and witnessed everything. And there's a diorama of Dealey Plaza and the assassination scene below it. Finally, we enter a replication of the East Room in the White House, where Kennedy's casket lay in state on November 23rd for private viewings of family and government officials before being removed on the 24th for a funeral procession to the Capitol, the funeral at St. Matthew's, and the burial at Arlington. Here in the center is the actual flag that was draped over Kennedy's casket while it lay in state in the East Room on November 23rd. The flag was switched out for the ceremonies of November 25th, and that is the flag that was folded and presented to Jackie at Arlington, and it is now in the collections of the JFK library. Mr. Farrell informed me that they don't advertise this flag, and outside of the museum, don't really provide information on how they acquired it out of respect for the Kennedy family, but they do have a placard in the room that provides evidence of what happened to this flag. Before visiting, I was unsure if this was a real thing, but now I'm very certain that this flag did drape the casket of President Kennedy, which is incredible. They also have the veil that Jackie wore during the funeral on November 25th. This is also an iconic and unbelievable relic of such a tragic day. This is a piece of cloth that was used to cover the catafalque in the East Room while Kennedy lay in state. This is the flag that flew over the Capitol building on November 21st, when Kennedy left Washington for the last time. Those are all 17 issues of Life magazine which Jackie Kennedy was featured on. The Kennedy collection here is nothing but impressive. I highly recommend a trip for any Kennedy buff just for this one exhibit, but there's still much more here at Historic Auto Attractions. Next up is the White House exhibit, with a lot of original furniture from the executive mansion throughout its history. These furnishings are from the music room. There's a credenza commissioned by Jackie Kennedy. The furnishings were also from the Kennedy tenure, and the music box and music stand is from the McKinley years. Furnishings from the Red Room include a Truman-era coffee table. The red furnishings were from the Franklin Roosevelt years, and the concert chairs are from the Carter era. This is the Blue Room. The executive desk was from the Arthur administration, and it was used in Arthur's executive office. The gold leaf chairs are Kennedy. The blue three-piece set were from the Eisenhower and Kennedy era. This marble-top coffee table was used in the War Room during the Franklin Roosevelt years. The Green Room has a Truman sideboard. The marble table was given to Truman by General MacArthur. The coffee table was used in the State Dining Room by Eisenhower, and the couch and chairs were gifted to the Eisenhowers from Spain. Here are a bunch of presidential clocks, including ones that belong to FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Coolidge, Hoover, Taft, Cleveland, and they also have Andrew Jackson's Seth Thomas wall clock that was used in the White House. This clock was presented to General Eisenhower by the exiled Dutch government in honor of the failed Operation Market Garden. This clock was hung in the White House while he was president, but Eisenhower insisted that it not be wound or used at all because it reminded him of the failure. This grandfather clock was given to the Trumans in 1950 by the presiding Senate. It was used in the East Room. This is a pretty incredible piece. This was the War Room's fireplace mantle during the Roosevelt and Truman years. What makes this a very historic relic from the White House is that in 1945, President Harry S. Truman, in the presence of the Secretaries of State and War, signed the order to drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That was a tough decision and a very consequential one, and that has truly changed the world forever, and that decision was officially approved and enacted right on that mantle. This was Nixon's personally used desk from the White House. This desk was a gift to the White House in 1954 by Governor Maddox of New York, so it was used by the Eisenhowers. This sideboard was gifted to the Trumans by Franklin Furniture in 1946. It was also placed in the War Room. A Tiffany stained glass lamp used by Truman at Camp David. There's also a chair from Truman's Camp David, and Truman's personally used music room chair, and Eisenhower's Army staff chair. A dresser from Theodore Roosevelt's White House, along with a children's couch and chair. These were personally owned by Roosevelt and were used by his children in the White House. This wooden dresser was personally used at the White House during the Eisenhower and Kennedy years, so this was used by Mamie Eisenhower and Jackie Kennedy. Displayed on the dresser are some of Jackie's makeup equipments. The rocking chair was given to Cardinal Cushing by John F. Kennedy. The cardinal was very close to the Kennedy family. He married them, baptized them, and he presided over JFK's funeral. And that caneback chair next to it was used by Eisenhower in the Oval Office. This chair was gifted to Franklin D. Roosevelt by William Morris in 1935, and Roosevelt used this in his personal study. This chair belonged to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He purchased it in 1966 and used it at his cabin hideaway where he wrote his final books, like Where Do We Go From Here? And there's also a wax figure of Dr. King. This was the first mechanical sewing machine used at the Executive Mansion. It was brought in during the Polk administration in 1848. This red couch was gifted to the Eisenhowers by the state of California, and it was used in the Red Room. This is President Lyndon B. Johnson's suit. He wore this during a Vietnam War TV broadcast in 1968, and seeing this in person you can tell that LBJ was definitely a towering figure. There's one of his hats, 2 pairs of his eyeglasses, and an Air Force One cigarette pack, a Johnson campaign hat, his Lord Elgin watch, and his keychain and tie clasp. That's LBJ's cowboy hat, his wool hat, and another one of his iconic hats. Here is one of First Lady Lady Bird Johnson's dresses. The pink dress also belonged to Lady Bird, along with those shoes and the white gloves, and there's some other Johnson era memorabilia. This is the pen Johnson used to sign the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, which authorized the formation of local community action agencies. These are 2 of First Lady Rosalind Carter's dresses. And this eagle was made of crushed pecans from the Jimmy Carter Library. This display has 2 of First Lady Pat Nixon's dresses, along with her hat worn on an African safari. This telephone and directory was used at the White House during the Nixon years. This is one of President Richard Nixon's suits. This display contains some very antiquated documentation and a piece of wood taken from George Washington's original casket. He got a new one when he got put in a different tomb at Mount Vernon, and the original casket pieces were sold off as souvenirs. This is a John Quincy Adams Presidential Indian Peace Medal and a James Monroe Presidential Peace Medal. This is a very odd and kind of disturbing life mask of George Washington. They also have one of Rutherford B. Hayes. A ticket to Andrew Johnson's Senate impeachment trial. That was quite the spectacle, and tickets into the chamber to witness it were sold for a lot of money at the time. Some First Lady autographs. There's a book and autograph of Vice President Spiro Agnew, and a Nixon inauguration program. That is Benjamin Harrison's walking stick, along with Taft's walking cane right behind it. A sterling silver spoon used by Theodore Roosevelt. That is General Zachary Taylor's personal razor. Artifacts of Taylor's are the rarest of any president. First Lady Grace Coolidge's rose chiffon stole. She was a very fashionable lady during the Roaring '20s. That is one of President Ronald Reagan's suit jackets. And a flag that flew over the US Capitol during his funeral in 2004. Reagan used this pen to sign the Social Security Amendment of 1983, which did allow for high-level federal employees to be able to get Social Security. That used to not be the case. That is the presidential M&M box. He had a bunch of these as the traditional presidential gift at the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in 1988. That's a piece of the Berlin Wall, a baseball cap signed by George Bush, a Bush Medal of Merit, Bush's golf ball, tie clasp, cufflinks, and some other Bush-era artifacts. This flag was signed by President Bush. This is the flag that was taken down from the White House at noon on January 20th, 1977, when Jimmy Carter was sworn in and Gerald Ford was no longer president. some of Reagan's tie clasps, a Reagan keychain, a Reagan medal, Nixon's pens, and other presidential pens. Those are Kennedy's gold writing pens, since they're so small he could conceal them in his hands, and also Kennedy was a doodler. This is the pen used by President Kennedy to sign the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963 with the Soviet Union and Great Britain. It banned nuclear tests in the atmosphere, space, and underwater. This is the Illinois Stock Car Hall of Fame. The owner, Wayne Lensing, was involved with that. This is a 1940s Ford Coup dirt stock race car. It is left as Lensing found it out rotting away in a field in Iowa. This is the World of Speed exhibit, which is a really great collection of race car memorabilia. This is Dale Earnhardt's racing suit next to his son Junior's racing suit. This is a 1940s midget racer, Hill Gas Flathead V8. This Bud Light GT was driven by Davy Jones. The blue race car is Tom Sneva's 1977 Indy car. It was the first car to ever reach 200 miles per hour during the Indy 500, and there's also a 1984 sprint car next to it. This is Joe Amato's 1998 Hemi-powered Top Fuel dragster. Amato won the NHRA Top Fuel Championship a record 5 times. This is a 1960s slingshot dragster, which was actually very dangerous. This is a 1929 Indy car, one of the vintage ones that still required a mechanic to drive with it. The 1929 Indy 500 winner was Ray Keech, but he was killed 2 weeks later at a different speedway. In the early days of the Indy 500, mechanics had to ride along, and this is an Indy 500 mechanics jacket from the earliest races. That's pretty cool. That's a section of blacktop from the original Old Beach and Road race course in Daytona Beach that was used before the big Daytona Speedway, and this racing piston is autographed by Dale Earnhardt. This is a 1986 DeLorean time machine. Just like the one used in the 1985 classic Back to the Future, the DeLorean itself was a huge failure before the movie. There's wax figures of Marty McFly and Doc Brown. The Batman costume worn by George Clooney in the 1997 Batman and Robin film. Next to that is one of the Batmobiles from the original Batman TV series, custom made in 1965 by George Barris, based on Ford's abandoned Futura concept. This Batmobile is from the 1992 Batman Returns, directed by Tim Burton. This one does look very Art Deco, which is very cool. And this is the Bat Missile from Batman Returns. That Batmobile could convert into this Bat Missile in the movie. And there's a wax figure of Danny DeVito's Penguin, along with the Joker. This is the Flintstones mobile from the 1994 Flintstones movie, and a police uniform from the sequel, Viva Rock Vegas. And this may be the actual Ecto-1 from Ghostbusters. There's a few museums out there that claim to have the real one, but Historic Auto Attractions does claim that this is the one driven by the cast in the film. This is a very iconic piece of 80s history. There are wax figures of Archie and Edith Bunker from All in the Family. Louise and George Jefferson wore the skirt suit and jackets in the Jefferson sitcom, which was a spin-off of All in the Family. This is one of the 1950 Mercury pickup trucks from Sanford & Son. There were 3 used in filming the show. And this is a real set from Sanford & Son, used for filming the living room of Sanford's place in Watts. This is a 1964 Ford Galaxy used in the Andy Griffith Show, straight out of Mayberry, North Carolina. It is signed by the cast of the show. This is the uniform worn by Don Knotts as Barney Fife in the Andy Griffith Show. Here are some wax figures of the characters of MASH. They do have a hat worn by Harry Morgan as Colonel Potter, and a cap worn by Radar and MASH. Wax figures of Captain Kirk and Spock from the original Star Trek TV series. There are wax figures of the Fonz, Laverne, and Shirley from Happy Days, along with some screen-used clothing. Wax figures of Steven Seagal, Danny DeVito, Michael Douglas, Paul Hogan, Bruce Willis, and Jay Leno. Hogan did famously play Crocodile Dundee, so they do have a crocodile. I'll say it again, this place has just as many wax figures as an actual museum, plus all the real amazing artifacts. And there's a creepy Pinocchio up there. This is the family truckster from Chevy Chase's National Lampoon's Vacation. Here's a collection of more First Lady autographs. They ran out of room in the White House area. This is a 1955 Cadillac 75 limousine used by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this is a Lincoln limousine used by none other than Donald J. Trump. It is very rare now to see the cars of more modern presidents because the Secret Service now destroys all the presidential limousines, and this stuff is just very difficult to get a hold of. Trump used this limo during the crazy 2016 campaign. And here's a wax figure of President Trump. You don't see big artifacts of the current presidents at many places, so this is really neat. This engine was tested at the Bonneville Salt Flats of Utah, where lots of world land speed records have been broken. They even have a freaking NASA exhibit here. This is a full-scale replica of Freedom 7, used by Alan Shepard in the Mercury 3 flights, the first manned US mission into space. Shepard was only up there for 19 minutes, but it was a big step. This is a full-scale replica of an Apollo command module. It is very similar to the one used in Apollo 11 to make it to the moon and back. That's a main landing gear tire used on Space Shuttle Discovery, perhaps the most experienced space shuttle in history, and I have seen the real thing at the Udvar Hazy Center. That little boy model is signed by the Enola Gay's crew, and this is the hat of Paul W. Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay. That's the flag that draped the casket of astronaut Ted Freeman at his burial at Arlington. He was selected to be one of the Apollo astronauts in 1963, but he was killed in 1964 when a goose smashed through the cockpit canopy of his jet trainer, making him the first fatality of the American Astronaut Corps. This is Gene Cernan's spacesuit glove from the Apollo 17 mission, making this one of the two last spacesuit gloves that have been on the moon. This is the Biopack couch from the MR2 suborbital flight test, where Ham the chimpanzee sat and was launched 640 kilometers over the Earth as a test mission to see if life could survive. And Ham did in fact survive the mission, and he was sitting right there. That's so cool. This is Bigfoot, Bob Chandler's 15-foot tall king of the monster trucks, made in 1979. This is a taxidermied African bull elephant, not quite as big as the Bigfoot over there, but pretty close. This is a Morris safari car. It was built by the Morris Seaplane Company of Madison, Wisconsin, and it's very vintage and very nice. And this is the conclusion of the main exhibit area of historic auto attractions, but there's still more. The last exhibit is the Lincoln Room, with one of the best Lincoln collections you'll find anywhere. There's a wax figure of the man himself, sitting down in an old chair. This chair was used by Abraham Lincoln in the presidential rail car. Despite Lincoln's overall simplicity, the presidential car was very opulent, and it was later used as his funeral train back to Springfield. What's really cool is the tear of the upholstery at the edge of the seat. He was very tall and tended to sit more towards the edge of the chair, so that section of upholstery was rubbed off by Lincoln's butt. This is a window frame from the home of William Herndon, Lincoln's longtime Springfield law partner. This is a piece of wood from the original New Salem Mill Dam, where Lincoln lodged on his trip to New Orleans in 1832 on a flatboat, and where he would later move and live for 6 years. This is an original Currier and Ives print of Lincoln's open casket laying in state, with all the elaborate catafalque that was prevalent during every location of the funeral, and as the funeral train moved from Washington to Springfield, it made many stops and had funerals in several major cities. That land grant was signed by Lincoln in 1861. This is one of First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln's dresses, along with her shoes. This is Abraham Lincoln's chair that he used at the White House. It was given to him as a gift in 1862 by Franklin Furniture of Illinois, and he used this in his personal study, which is now the Lincoln bedroom. They say this is General Robert E. Lee's jacket. I do question the authenticity of this. I think it's a replication, considering it's just out there, and I think the American Civil War Museum in Virginia has it. This is a replica of the chair that Lincoln was assassinated in at Ford's Theater. The real one is at the Henry Ford Museum. They do have a fragment of cloth from the real chair that was removed at some point. This is the tribute boot carriage that transported President Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln from the White House to Ford's Theater on that fateful night of April 14th, 1865. Out of all the things in this museum, this in my opinion is one of the most historically important artifacts. I mean, this is the carriage that took Lincoln to his doom at Ford's Theater. He was sitting right there. That's a section of the burial cloth used at Lincoln's burial service at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield. This is Mary Todd Lincoln's mourning skirt. She wore this one when Willie died in 1862, and then she wore it again in 1865 for the death of her husband. This is Mary Todd Lincoln's mourning veil. It would have covered the widow's face while in public. So they have Mary Lincoln and Jackie Kennedy's veils in this one museum. They also have her mourning fan. She did wear Victorian mourning clothes and used mourning accessories for the rest of her life after her husband's death. This is a rare CDV of the First Lady taken in early 1861 by Matthew Brady during the inaugural festivities. She is wearing the dress that she wore at the first inauguration. This black dress was worn by Eliza Blair at Lincoln's funeral. The Blairs were an important political family in the 19th century. Her husband, Francis Blair, was a founding member of the Republican Party, and Francis Blair's father, Montgomery Blair, was Lincoln's Postmaster General. This is one of the coins that were placed on Lincoln's eyelids after he died in the Peterson House on April 15th, when Edwin Stanton said he now belongs to the ages. This handkerchief was wrapped around Lincoln's head after he passed away to keep his jaw closed until rigor mortis set in, and it is stained with Lincoln's blood. These are the handles from Abraham Lincoln's original outer coffin. They were obtained by Herbert Wells Fay, one of the original caretakers of Lincoln's tomb. Lincoln was exhumed in 1884 to be viewed and identified, and then he was buried somewhere else to prepare for his placement in the permanent tomb, which was not yet finished. This is a hubcap off the gun caisson that carried the bodies of the Lincoln conspirators after they were hung. These are the manacles worn by Lewis Payne, known for being the most attractive Lincoln conspirator, while he was imprisoned. This doorknob is from Mary Surratt's boarding house. These are some badges that were around Mary Surratt's hands when she was hanged, along with bits of rope from Surratt's, Atzerott's, Payne's, and Harold's hanging ropes. There's a clipping of Mary Surratt's hair. This is First Lady Lucretia Garfield's mourning dress, which she wore at the funeral of her husband, the assassinated President James A. Garfield. That was the second assassination of a president, just 16 years after Lincoln. This is a piece of rope with which Garfield's assassin Charles Guiteau was hanged in 1883. This is also an amazing relic. The 35-star flag that was used at the dedication of the Soldiers National Cemetery at Gettysburg, and it was right there when Lincoln gave his famed Gettysburg Address. It did belong to Master Sergeant Smith Stimmel, who was the bodyguard and flag bearer of President Lincoln at the time, and that's the belt and eagle that was also present with the flag for the Gettysburg Address. That is the last piece of carpet still in existence on which Abraham Lincoln stood when he delivered his second inaugural address on March 4th of 1865. It survived the Indian Hill fire in 1959, which very tragically destroyed a lot of great Lincoln artifacts, including just about all of the carpet from the inaugural platform, a program from the Lincoln Memorial's dedication. This is a drapery cord from the Lincoln Springfield home that was hung after Lincoln's death. Apparently it was hung to a window curtain in Mr. Lincoln's library. This brick is from the Stewart and Lincoln Law Office building in Springfield. When Lincoln first moved there, he began as the junior partner of John Todd Stewart. And this is the original plaque that used to mark the site of the building. Unfortunately, it no longer stands. This is the Lincoln family reed pump organ. Mary Lincoln did play the organ as a pastime, and this does reflect the simplicity of the Lincoln's home. This reed organ was smaller and cheaper than other home organs. There are locks of President Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln's hair. That is Abraham Lincoln's personal spoon. Incredible piece of history right there. That was Lincoln's personal razor, which for many years prevented his iconic beard until he got a letter during the presidential campaign from a little girl who said he'd look better with a beard. Then this razor was retired. That's a piece of wood from the roof of the home where Lincoln's father, Thomas Lincoln, married Sarah Bush Johnston after Lincoln's mother had passed away. This was in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and I have been to the site of this house. So this Lincoln collection, as with all of the attractions here, is mind-blowing and beyond impressive. Again, this is one of the greatest museums in America, and you must come here for yourself.
Alright, so this is one of the greatest museums I've ever been to. Probably one of the best in the country. Definitely get out here. Like, this is a must-see. Just can't believe everything that I've seen. So if you like this video, make sure you've watched all the parts of my series here. Check out my other videos at museums, roadside attractions, presidential sites, auto museums, all sorts of stuff, so please go check those videos out. And thanks for watching.